Welcome back to another episode of Just Say It. I'm here with Matt. My name is Chase. We are the host and pastors of the Well Church. Today we're going to be talking about celebrity conversions to Christianity that have happened recently. Before we get into that, I wanted to remind you that we have Easter coming up at the Well Church here in Boulder. That'll be services on 4/20, which is funny in Boulder because everyone smokes pot.
Yeah. We also have Juniper in the studio today.
Yeah, my dog is here, which is lovely. Hopefully she won't bother us. If you're listening on audio, you shouldn't notice, but she is bumping a microphone right now. So services for Easter, 9 and 11 on 4/20. We'll have Good Friday that Friday before.
On Good Friday.
On Good Friday. And we'll have an Easter egg hunt on Saturday here at our church building, 300 South Broadway. You can find all that information at boulderwell.org. All right, Matt, we're going to talk about celebrity conversions to Christianity. Seems to be kind of what one friend has called a vibe shift, and that has kind of become a phrase people use. But a lot of people seem to be interested in Christianity and maybe exploring faith in a way they haven't before. So why don't you get us started?
Yeah, I think a good place to start, I'm actually going to pepper you with questions because the fun thing is usually we don't like research much, but today I did some research on this because I was fascinated by it. And so, because I know you didn't, because you're probably doing more important things.
Yes, I was reading Till Midnight, Thomas Hooker's,
Riveting.
Yes,
riveting.
I find it very
You
riveting.
do, yes. But so I'm going to pepper you with some questions, and I'll chime in from time to time as well. But I thought a good place to start would be this. If we're going to talk about celebrity conversions, there's a lot you can talk about, right? You can talk about, are they real? Everybody runs to Kanye.
Sure.
That kind of thing. We can talk about that for sure. I think that's like the predictable side of stuff. We can get into, are people hopping on the bandwagon? That's more interesting to me. Is Christianity cool enough again for people to hop on the bandwagon? I think that's an interesting topic. There's a lot of things we could get into, but I think where we've got to start is what I find the most fascinating is there is something happening that is undeniable, where there is at least a intrigue or interest that is out there that I don't remember from major celebrity figures about Christianity. So less about conversion, but more interest. And so some notable names you would think of would be a man who I do not believe is a Christian. I don't think he would say he's a Christian. Be like Jordan Peterson, psychologist.
Sure. Yep.
Joe Rogan, podcaster. Andrew Huberman, who's like a biohacking kind of guy, really famous in that kind of world. He claims to be a Christian. I don't know if he is actually, don't know much about him.
Sure.
Countless celebrities, a lot of people, but it seems to be the thing that a lot of people are talking about. Now, where I want to start and maybe get some of your insights would be this. I remember the early 2000s.
Yep.
The early 2000s, I would say, was kind of like the peak of the new atheist movement.
Yeah.
So you had Dawkins, Harris, guys like that, right? And they envisioned and discussed this idea of a humanist, a secular humanist society in which science flourished and it made society flourish and everything just go great. That was kind of the pitch.
Yeah, that was the vision.
And I think one of the things that we're seeing is that the secular humanism pipe dream is failing.
Yeah.
And people are responding to that. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think in the last 4 years, people have kind of woken up to how vacuous that kind of worldview is, how it's like doesn't offer a lot of hope because it comes from a materialist framework where there's no transcendence, there's no interest in immaterial realities. And so once a plague, a pandemic, you might say, or as other friends say, a plandemic, once stuff like that hits and you see certain laws and measures passed that don't really take into account other factors for what we might call human flourishing, such as spiritual maturity, satisfaction in God, or having peace in the face of death. Instead, it seems to be very what some have called draconian, tyrannical measures enforced on people, shutting people's businesses down, schools, livelihood, all these kinds of things. People realize, I don't know if I like this way of living. It's the famous question, one of your favorite ones to ask is, how's that working out for you? How is that going for you?
Yeah.
It's a pragmatic question. It's a consequentialist argument. And once you kind of embrace it, it's kind of a fantasy land to live in, the secular humanist thing built on top of Christian morality, Christian principles. Furthermore, I mean, there's so many things we could talk about.
Yeah.
You see the erosion of cultural, we'll call it cohesion in Europe, and how it seems irreconcilable to bring in a bunch of Muslims who have a completely different principled-based morality. I wouldn't say it's principled, but they have a different vision of morality that seems to be eroding the fabric of society and tearing it apart. And so I think there's a great deal of what we could call deconstruction.
Yeah.
And this kind of goes hand in hand with postmodernism. And deconstruction doesn't seem to just be affecting the church. It seems to be affecting those who would claim to be kind of secular atheist in general.
Yeah. No, absolutely. When I think about it, I think people at the end of the day are going to take stock on their life. And they're going to look around and they're going to ask that question, how's this working out? And I think people are looking back prior to like the new atheist movement or even the free love movement of the 60s and all of that kind of stuff and going, what has all this gotten us? And it's very fascinating because celebrities tend to be the spotlight of culture. Whether you can be a celebrity and be a TikToker, you could be a politician. Celebrity means a much wider thing. Where I think when I would talk to my grandmother, if I said celebrity, she'd think of like a movie star.
Yep.
Well, all that's included, there's much more to that. And so I think you're even seeing it get to these people who maybe lived out like that secular humanist, that hedonistic lifestyle to the max because they had the funds to do so. And they're seeing the emptiness of it and they're coming around to it. And I think that's actually having an effect societally. I think it's very fascinating because there's an argument to be made. So we'll pick on Jordan Peterson a little bit. You may like him, you may not. I don't really care. That's not really the point of this. But Jordan Peterson, right? Like, I find it fascinating. I remember talking to a young man not that long ago who was telling me he was reading Jordan Peterson, and he's not a Christian. And he's like, so I started making my bed every day.
It's great.
That's one of the things that Jordan Peterson tells you to do, which is funny, but he's like, you're completing a task. And he said, I heard Jordan Peterson say I should read my Bible. And that surprised me. So I started reading the Bible. And I'm like, what a fascinating time. And we'll get into conversion and stuff, but I think it's really interesting to see that there is an influence that a lot of these people have, whether you like them or not, or you agree with their stances on different things. But you can't deny that there is a interesting dynamic that happens societally when even people who aren't Christians are looking at Christianity and going, there's some wins in here that we need to take stock of. I would love to hear your thoughts on that, being raised in Texas, the Dallas area, and kind of almost, I would assume, you correct me if I'm wrong, that you were raised that kind of nominal understanding of Christianity is like the worst thing that a Christian could be. It would be better to be an atheist because at least we know where they stand. That's a phrase I've heard people say before. Maybe talk about that a little bit and what's going on with celebrities and this and that kind of dynamic.
Yeah, there's a lot there. It's funny. I was reading Thomas Hooker yesterday on hypocrisy, and hypocrisy in Puritan England and New England was a problem. They saw it as a problem. These were people who were nominal Christians, and they would just go to church, but they weren't regenerate. They didn't actually they said the right things in public, but they didn't really love God.
Yeah.
And what we've seen in the last 20 years is for some evangelical leaders and some people who deconstruct, there is a temptation, and they give into it often, to seek to destroy nominal Christianity.
Yeah.
They seek to destroy hypocrisy. And I sympathize with a disdain for hypocrisy. It comes from multiple places. I want it to come from a biblical place. For most people, I think it's more motivated by a desire for quote-unquote authenticity, like you're not real. People want a genuine thing. And so what a lot of the leaders, like Ray Ortlund would be an example, who hate what they call Bible Belt Christianity and Christian culture.
Just so the listeners know, they've actually said they hate that.
Yeah,
that's an actual quote.
What they say. They've never recanted this. This is a common thing that they celebrate. And so what they celebrate is actually dumb, in that the Puritans never wanted to like basically overthrow either established Christianity or Christianity being the norm. Instead, in a hypocritical or nominal environment, they preached harder about sins, drunkenness, slothfulness, lust, all these kinds of things. And you could make arguments that they went too hard, I suppose, but they were simply trying to, we could use the word afflict. They were preaching very hard sermons, but they never got into the area of like, therefore we should overthrow the Christian order of the Christian world. And they went so far as to say, like, you may hate nominal Christianity, you may hate hypocrisy, but they're still better than outright pagans who hate God openly. And so there is a order of your kind of disdain or disgust for certain practices. At least the nominal Christian is giving lip service. And so with all that said, what you see recently is like, okay, so a lot of these people who hate nominal Christianity have kind of had their dreams come true. They have seen the fruit of like the destruction of Christian culture in America in many places, not all places. And what motivates a lot of them is they want real Christianity. And of course, when you mention that, they typically will suggest some first century recapitulation of like communal lifestyle. And it's essentially when they read Acts 2, they read communism into it.
Yep.
And so they kind of have their dreams come true. And that's not going well for people. That's not going well for your neighbor. That's not going well for our institutions. It's not going well for the trust that our society seems to lack right now. We have a low trust society in many ways, where we don't know who we can trust. We don't trust our institutions, the government, the media, whoever it may be. And so I think a lot of these people that are converting or exploring, like you said, you mentioned the friend who's reading the Bible and that kind of thing, they're going, that's not a great way to live. You know, at the end of that road is me living in an apartment I can't afford, ordering Uber Eats, becoming lazy and just a consumer and binging Netflix every night as I work a low-wage job.
Porn addicted, not really desiring to pursue a woman or a husband. Kind
of this where you see the incel type stuff. And so I think a lot of guys particularly are waking up to that and going, what alternatives are there?
Yeah.
Because this alternative isn't actually fruitful.
Yeah, I find it interesting that I think God, our church, we're studying 1 Samuel right now. It's very interesting to me that even in there, you kind of just see God allow the people of God. We just finished 1 Samuel 7. I know when this comes out, we'll be beyond that and everything. But one of the things that stood out to me was God just kind of let the people be there for 20 years while the ark was in a home. And the people just lamented for a time period. And there's just like, what's going on? And God uses throughout Scripture all sorts of different things to bring about his purposes and his will. And so I think there is the potential. And now I want to be careful. I mean, we saw this, when was the Asbury thing?
2023.
2023,
yep.
Where it's like Christians love to grab onto something like this and go, see, it's just like the Great Awakening or the Reformation or, you know, the early church, you know, depending on whichever one you like, right? And they'll run with it. And so I don't want to do that, but I do want to say, like, hey, God does revive people. He does bring his will to bear, and it will come to bear ultimately. And it's funny who he'll use. One of the fascinating ones to me that's actually now talking about the positives of Christianity is Louise Perry. She was the women's rights activist, and she wrote the book recently, The Case Against the Sexual Revolution. And it's just fascinating to me to see that. I haven't read the book. I maybe should after researching this. I was like, I want to see what she said, because I actually, when I was reading it, the reviews, I think it was Vogue magazine or something like that, was just like ripping her as like a, a turncoat and all this kind of stuff. And so I'm going, it should, at least in the listeners, us, cause us to step back and go, what's happening here? What are these people interested in? And so something that I know that you've thought about a lot, I've thought about it a lot, is the kind of Christianity that people, these celebrities are showing up to. Of course, you've got like Justin Bieber was notorious for being at Hillsong. Okay. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of them going to Catholicism. There's a big swath of, what's the guy from the Tank movie? I'm spacing on his name. Buff.
Shia LaBeouf.
Shia LaBeouf, right? He converted to Catholicism. At least he says he did. And he's, been on Catholic podcasts and things like that. So you're seeing a lot of guys go there. There's an article that came out last year in the Sentinel, and it's about celebrities and young people especially coming back to the church, but it's very high church. We've noticed the reality of the growth of the Orthodox Church, the Anglican Church here in the States. What is it that you think these people are drawn to now? And I get it. Some are drawn to mega churchy kind of things. That's going to happen. But in a generalization, what are people drawn to now? What's the thing that's causing them to come back, other than God drawing them himself, obviously?
Yeah, the interest they have in that, I would say, is they're looking for something rooted in a rootless world. And we live in a rootless world, and by that I mean we feel cut off. Like the way I described it, I preached Easter on this, and I don't know how well it went. I think it was a great sermon, and several others remarked, but some people did
It was
not.
great.
It was a fun sermon. It was at the Boulder Theater.
I remember every word.
Thanks. And I described Western culture as like a cut flower. Your wife deals with flowers, and so she knows about this. When you have a flower that's planted and rooted, it can grow and have life, but when you cut it, it has a shelf life. There's only certain things you can do, and it's going to die and decay, which is why my sons bought my wife Lego flowers, because they'll never decay, right?
I hate that.
And my wife did not appreciate that Christmas gift. But when we talk about Western culture being kind of a cut flower, it feels rootless. It feels like it's decaying. It feels like social fabric is breaking down. It feels disconnected. And people feel this when they grow up, they go to college somewhere far away from family. They don't know when they're going to see their grandparents again or when they're going to see their parents. They're connected to a job, which may move them to another place. Then they're supposed to find a spouse from a different background and a different culture. And then they're supposed to move somewhere and start a life together and start a family. Then they have to find friends. And there's no baked-in social cohesion. And so what do you get when you go to a really high church or stringent tradition? Well, they give you roots. They give you a sense of connectedness to something that's greater than yourself and something historic that you don't find in a lot of places. Instead, what a lot of kind of consumer culture offers is a fake kind of rootedness, where it's like, we're a historic American brand, buy a Ford or something like that, where it's like they're trying to tap into that desire for connection to something greater by offering you products that make you feel like I'm part of something bigger than myself. And so when people go to these high church traditions, they're not looking for kind of the next McChurch, the kind of lowest common denominator of Christianity. They're looking for something robust. They're looking for something that's transcendent and something that gives them a sense of like, I'm connected.
Yeah. Can I jump in there real quick? Something interesting you said is you're talking about how it's not. You went to Orthodox Church. You talked about this on one of our previous podcasts, just when you're on sabbatical, just to check it out. And we've had conversations about one of the things that stood out to you was how much you weren't trying to be sold on stuff. It was kind of like, this is how we do it, learn it, and be part of it. That was kind of how it goes. I was raised in a Catholic church. It's very much how it goes there. If you show up to a Catholic church, usually you don't even have a greeter. It's just like you go sit down, and there's like, you learn the thing by being there. It's very interesting. So I was reading this Vogue article that was ripping on it was calling it I can't remember exactly, but it was essentially saying the Christian rite of Catholicism. Hello, Juniper. For those who can't see, Juniper has climbed up on Chase's lap now. So maybe you do want to watch on YouTube this week. But what it did on in the article was that they're talking about like how the Catholic Church, how it was like a marketing thing that they were doing to draw these people in. And then the funny thing is when they interview all of these famous people, the number one thing that they all said that they loved about it the most was they weren't being sold anything.
Yeah.
And so it's like, no, it's funny because they will end up using, I think it's an important thing to think about when we think about these celebrities or just people in general coming to the church, is the world that still hates God is going to try to reason why this is happening. They're going to try to find a reason for it. And the reason that I saw in reading that article was that this must be a marketing thing or it's a psychological problem that they're going through. And so they'll move it into this camp of kind of psychobabble of unmet needs from their parents and these kinds of things, or it's a return to the roots of, a simpler time of what they remember from their childhood. And it's just this, it was so funny to read it. I'm like, no, I think people believe in Jesus because it's true.
Right.
That's why they come. And because God calls them, and based off our Protestant disposition, the effectual call of Christ is irresistible. And so therefore people come and they can't turn away from it. And so it's really interesting to think about how the world is kind of navigating this, how they're like, and so I would just say, if you're actually having victories of like inviting friends to church, coworkers, or you see a celebrity coming to church, be prepared. People are going to throw stones at that, and they're going to give a lot of excuses as to why it's happening. And I find it very fascinating that a lot of people are going to more traditional or high church kind of experiences, which in a way kind of eliminates they're just being marketed to. Right.
Yeah, it is interesting. I think that as people come to church and they're looking for that kind of, we can call it authentic Christianity. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. It's true. It's earnest. It's sincere, even though it may be different in different branches of Christianity. There's a real, I think, indictment on evangelical establishment leaders who have commodified the church to be a market segment within kind of the broader kind of Western or American landscape. So what I mean is, there for let's say pastors born before 1965, there is a temptation.
Boomers.
Yes, there is a temptation to treat evangelism and reaching new people as equivalent to business leadership, reaching new customers, maintaining a market share, and thinking it in a very commercialized way, that if you're going to reach people, you must do these certain things. And I'm not opposed to being creative or talking about those things. I understand them because I know them.
Yeah.
I was trained in them. We both were, and we're familiar with them. And we're not opposed to new methods and all that kind of stuff. But they are having a hard time grappling with this reality that what if the church isn't a commodity or a business in the sense that we've conceived it to be? How do we reach people in that kind of environment?
Yeah, you can't pipeline everybody.
No, and so there's a temptation, I think there would be a temptation for some evangelical churches who notice this to then change everything in order to reach new customers, new people, the lost, and pretend to be some like traditional church that's really inconsistent with your own church's history, the pastor's convictions, or the church's kind of statement of faith.
Yeah.
And so there needs to be a sobriety for our churches in America, Protestant churches particularly, to think, how have I gotten this wrong? How have I kind of misconceived of ministry and the church's mission?
Yeah, no, that's good. Okay, I'm going to riff off that. We're going to go off topic a little bit because this is an opportunity to talk about something that conversations that you and I, elders, we have a lot that maybe we don't get to say on a Sunday from the pulpit because it just doesn't match the text. Not that we wouldn't say it. I find it very fascinating. There's a temptation in the church. I feel this. I know you've felt it. I think other church leaders out there feel it. And it's this. It's, you want a full church. You want to grow. Right. And you would love for that to be through salvations. But also, we've always been fine with, we live in a place where a lot of people move here and they need to find a good church. And hopefully we can be a good church for them where they can come be members and they can grow in their faith and glorify God more and worship him rightly. That's what we want for them. But there's a temptation where it's like, you know, everybody talks about evangelism and how they want to reach the lost, reach the lost, reach the lost. What I actually see a lot of churches doing in their liturgy and how they're structured, and from kids ministry all the way up through groups and how things are done, it's actually more angled towards ministering towards kind of generic evangelicals and their expectations for the church. So what do I expect if I'm a generic evangelical? And I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I just mean it just generally. Like, I was raised in kind of general evangelicalism of the 80s and 90s and 2000s. And so, you know, and so what does that look like? Well, that looks like greeters are there to greet me. There's coffee. We have all these things. So I'm not knocking people. There's going to be a great kids ministry. Everything's going to be super explained to me. It's going to be this whole entire process. And then we kind of, my theory is we kind of coat that in. We do these things to be evangelistic to those who come into the church who don't know how it works.
Sure.
And I'm like, no. I actually think what we're doing is we're just trying to make it really easy for the Christians.
Yep.
If based off what I'm seeing, we wanted to be evangelistic, we would actually be more historically rooted.
Yep.
And we would throw off some of these kind of constraints that we put on ourselves as a church.
Yeah, that's always been a problem in ministry, or challenge, I'll say, because people will come to church from all sorts of different backgrounds, whether Catholic, atheistic, Baptist, whatever it may be, and they have different expectations. And so even the way we, you know, it was funny. We did Starting Point for a while. I think we called it something lame before that, but but everyone was doing it. Like, you notice on any church you go to now, they have Starting Point, you know,
or 101,
and that's fine. Like that's inevitably going to happen when we live in a world that's very much shaped by other people, and we're inspired by other people who do things really well. So that's not wrong. But even the language we use, do life together, get connected here, all of this is very in-group language. And that's, again, not wrong. But a lot of it we sell is like creating a pipeline to connect, or whatever it may be. And it's like, what if we've just really overcomplicated? I think of small group ministry, where it's like, if you come from a church background, the expectation is that your church has small groups, some kind of fellowship groups, whether it's demographic-based, marriage, singles, young adults is really hot right now. Every church wants to start
hot right now.
Young adults ministry, all this kind of stuff. And that's, again, nothing wrong in principle with doing that, but there doesn't seem to be a great deal of reflection on, like, if that's, like, necessary or the best thing we could do right now. Because actually what we're seeing is a lot of the lost people, or people that are exploring Christianity, that are either coming to our church or going to other churches, they're not interested in being another demographic marker.
No.
They're interested in, like, I'd like to get to know families, like, not in a weird way. Like, I'm single and I have no family here.
Yeah.
You know?
And they want to do it in a really normal way.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this actually as we were preparing for this podcast. I was like, what if, okay, so we live in Boulder. What if Dion showed up at our church? Probably not going to happen. Or Joe Rogan, or the lady who wrote the book about the failure of the sexual revolution. And I'm just picturing these people, and some of them I know better, or Russell Brand's a big one right now. They show up and they go, hey, here's our starting point, and we just want to do life together. I actually think I'm kind of more like those people, and I almost just have an aversion to it. I'm like, that sounds weird.
Right.
I don't really want that. I'd love to come worship with you all and check this out.
Right. And
maybe grab lunch sometime, or a beer, or, you know, I don't really do coffee with guys. That's a whole nother podcast for another day. But I think it's really funny that it's like this whole thing. I'm like, actually, every normal dude that I know, or woman, is just like, I'm really not that interested in being plugged into your pipeline.
Exactly. It's weird.
You know, and that's, we spin our wheels on it. Okay, let me get us back on topic.
Okay.
Let's get back onto the celebrity kind of thing here a little bit. So with these celebrities, whether their conversions are true or not, quite frankly, that is not our place to judge. The Bible's very clear on that, but we can also see fruit in their life. But there's a bigger thing here. I want to read you this quote, Chase, and it's from a Spectator article that was written about the church in Great Britain almost exactly a year ago. But I think it's a good quote. And it's talking about celebrities and young people and just different groups coming, exploring Christianity. And I want you to respond to this quote. I promise I did not give it to Chase beforehand. It says this. But Christianity is not just a useful lifeboat for stranded intellectuals. If it isn't literally true, it isn't valuable. Whether Jesus Christ actually rose from the dead matters, right? So what would you say to that? Like, because I think there's like a fear that I have that we're kind of just becoming this, while right now it's more popular in the United States to be conservative, as we know that the popular vote went for Trump. So that's where I'm drawing that from, not just making that up. It seems to be, not all things, but generally being conservative is a little bit more okay than it was 4 years ago. And so there's a danger in there as well. And I like that idea of that when I read that quote of, it's a lot of the intellectuals that are coming over to Christianity. And is it just a lifeboat for them to kind of hang on to make it through this season?
Right. I think that the church can serve in that way. I don't think it's wrong for people to find solace or refuge in the church and then become a Christian in that manner. So we shouldn't necessarily, get rid of that kind of sense that the church is a place where people who have been either truly hurt or, are disillusioned, that they can come in. But yeah, I mean, like the reality is they're going to have to be confronted with the truths and the claims of Christ. And so while it would be fun to try to create a kind of a market share mentality of like, okay, our market segment is intellectuals who are disillusioned. We'll find a dozen of those in Boulder and we're going to go after them. And that's our whole brand, the words we use, the things we talk about, the sermons, everything is going to be tailored to reach them. That would be an interesting thing, but I think it's more important that Christianity kind of asserts itself as positively true and good for people, and then also preaches in such a way as to bring about repentance. So there needs to be, with that kind of like, if there's a person exploring Christianity because they've been hurt or disillusioned, there needs to be a confrontation of like their own disillusionment with life in their own sin and how their own sin has led to the problems that they've either created for themselves or that they're suffering from. There has to be that kind of confrontation. Yeah.
I think there's an interesting thing that it's a hard thing for Christians to navigate in the sense that it's like we can see the realities of Christianity being for some almost a useful tool for suppressing things like radical Islam or just Islam in general, or the transgender movement, like where our conservative values may overlap, and we have some common ground. And so there's some people that are seeking to use the church, our faith, our Lord, to suppress those things. I don't think that's necessarily bad. I don't think there's like some cabal in the back room, like how do we get this together, right? That's doing that sort of thing. But I think like when you see these celebrities and different people, political figures, exploring Christianity, I think some of it's mixed in with the reality that like this is useful for our cause.
Right.
And I would just say where we are societally, I'm okay with that, where we stand right now. But the interesting thing is where the church needs to advance and take advantage of is, well, if they're going to come sit in your pew, you need to tell them the truth.
Exactly.
You need to tell them the truth that they are a sinner and that the things that they want aren't going to sustain without Christ. It is Christ or chaos. There's a great quote. Can I read it from Lewis on it? It says this. It says, if you read history, you will find that Christians who did the most for the present world were just those who thought most of the next. The impact of Christianity on the West is intrinsically linked to the living faith of those who established in institutions and values. If people hadn't actually believed in in the Christian promise of redemption, and if they hadn't been able to hope in the face of death, they wouldn't have had the courage to change the world in Jesus' name. Right? So that's Lewis there. And I think we have to tell people like, hey, you want to change the world. There's some overlap here, but your change that you'll bring about will just be another form of it that will erode. And so if you really want to achieve these things, you need to repent and you need to believe. And that's where I see a lot of churches missing it with these sorts of things, where if like Justin Bieber shows up at Hillsong, it's more of a celebration of Justin Bieber being there instead of the repentance and belief of a sinner who now believes coming home. And that's the danger that we run, where we celebrate these people in a way that is just going to end up, I don't know, leading to potential like apostasy and I don't know, and just kind of giving people a false hope of what they're doing, you know, and then that's when you can see a lot of these people fall away.
Yeah, I think going back to what you said earlier, I think one thing that I might have some opinions that differ from the majority on this regarding celebrity conversions. Yeah. So, like, there is a sense Christians get very confused on how to discern and who they should judge and how to judge, because they've been beat over the head with a Bible verse, judge not lest you be judged.
Yeah.
But there's discernment necessary. And so, like you mentioned, we can only be in charge of the sheep within our charge. Like, we can't.
Correct.
At the same time, we should have a level of discernment where we don't laud or heap praise upon celebrity conversions too quick. There's writings in the New Testament about, someone who just became a Christian shouldn't be put into leadership too soon. So you see this with like Russell Brand, and this is not to judge him harshly, but you see him coming from New Age. Mm-hmm. His journey is just so fun to watch. He got baptized, and now he's
by Bear Grylls.
Wild. I didn't know that. That's wild.
Yeah, Bear Grylls called him and gave him, I can't remember, like he actually called him and said, hey, on this date, do you want to get baptized?
Wow.
And he was like, and he jokes about it. He says, I said yes, but I meant no.
That's funny.
Which is really funny.
Yeah, but now you see him like out there teaching about Christianity, right? And it's fine to share one's testimony. I think that can be helpful. But even that should be very like even when we baptize people at the well and we ask people to share their testimony, that testimony needs to be thought out and written down. And we want at least one of the elders to have reviewed it beforehand to make sure that person isn't either impugning themselves or saying something that goes against the teachings of the church. And so the problem with a lot of the celebrity stuff is they immediately, for a lot of revivalistically minded Christians, evangelicals, they get super excited. Mm-hmm. Well, who's the lady, the OnlyFans girl?
Nala Ray. I don't know if I'm saying her name right because I don't really know.
Yeah, I don't know either.
But thank God I do not actually know much about her.
Yeah, so like I think there may be more than I don't really keep up with that, but I've heard about this stuff. And so you have somebody that's living a lifestyle that's completely degenerate, basically internet prostitution. And then they seem to come to a knowledge of saving faith. They seem to have repented and put their faith in Jesus Christ. Gosh, there is a great temptation for many Christians because in evangelical culture, we love that story. We love the guy who's like, I was addicted to heroin, now I'm a Christian. And I love that too. Like, I love that story of life change. Yeah. There's also prudence, and there should be a sobriety. And a great example would be Kanye West. When Kanye West seemed to have become a Christian, at a guy who I guess went to MacArthur Seminary, it was in L.A., and I did some investigation on that in terms of just like looking up the church, looking up the conversion story. And now you see him out there, and he's still promoting a lot of degeneracy.
He's launching a porn site. And
this is insane. Yeah. And so this is inconsistent with Christianity. And so there is a sense of judgment where it's like you should, for these celebrity conversions, it's kind of a wait and see approach. Like, I hope for the best. I know human nature. Mm-hmm. And I know that there can be false kind of conversions where people latch onto this stuff. And so we shouldn't get too excited too quick when we see this stuff. We should kind of have a wait and see approach. It was really like Jordan Peterson's a great example. I've learned a lot from him. I know several of our members of the church have gone to see him speak. I'd love to see him speak. He's a very effective communicator and has a lot to offer, but he comes from a Jungian framework of kind of secular counseling, and that can be useful in some ways, like the guy making his bed and that kind of thing. But, you saw him with the Daily Wire trying to teach the Bible and you look at the table. I think it's like 12 guys. It's a kind of funny picture.
Yeah.
And I think there's only one. There might be one Catholic on there, and he's kind of a famous kind of Catholic guy that's doesn't go along with the Pope's kind of liberal ideas. But besides that, it's all like kind of agnostics and Jews and other people. And you're like, why are they teaching? Like, I don't want to hear from them teaching. They don't like they have not submitted themselves to the Bible. It's fun to see them explore Christianity. It's fun to see them wrestle with the things of God. Like, I think his last tour was "We Who Wrestle with God" or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's fun, I guess. But like, unless there's true heart change and a submission to God in all of life and a worship of the Lord Jesus Christ, then a lot of it's just kind of meaningless, even though it might be helpful for getting more people interested in Christianity. So there's a tension, a great tension I feel in my soul about these things, because I never want to squash somebody's blossoming faith. I never want to step on it too harshly. At the same time, it needs to be cultivated, and that takes time. And life change typically doesn't happen in like a moment, and all of a sudden, like this girl, OnlyFans girl, who made millions, I guess, from what I hear, and now has this cush lifestyle, and she's saying she's regenerate. I'm like, well, wait and see. And is her material still out there? I don't know, but like, she should do everything within her power to remove it. And there could be an argument to be made that those millions she made from that wicked practice should be like given away.
Yeah.
You know, so there's lots of things to think about there. And I think that's why I'm saying it's an unpopular opinion, because for a lot of evangelicals, they're just really excited. And again, I love the excitement for Christianity. I love the excitement for things of God, but we should be sober-minded about it.
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts on that. One is this. It's very fascinating. So Russell Brand has like his podcast forever. I've actually never listened to it, but I found out if you like subscribe behind the paywall, you can like join a Russell Brand study.
Okay.
And I was curious, what are they studying? And so he's leading people through something. And I was like, what is it? And to my satisfaction, they're reading Mere Christianity together.
Oh, that's great.
Before that, they were reading Purpose Driven Life. Sure. We can, whatever. We don't have to go there. But I'm like, I find it funny that he's now profiting off of that, which,
guys got to eat.
Yeah. And Crossway does that all the time.
I know, right?
Right? Yeah. And so like, we ask for people's money at church. Yeah. If you haven't given this month, please do. Right? Like there's all of those sorts of things that are going on there. And I think something that you said, there's a couple of thoughts that I have to tag on to what you already said. One is you're talking about the process. Is one of the things I always like to say is that change is a process, not an event. Now, we could get into punctiliar salvation versus progressive, and that would bore people. But what I'm talking about is kind of this idea that generally salvation and what it looks like in people and growing is slow. And I think what the modern evangelical church loves is you've alluded to it, to the crazy story. If you tie that to a biblical story, they love the story of Paul, who is Saul, his drastic conversion, right? Being knocked off the horse, right? And I think it's funny that that's great. That happens for sure. I'd also say that's not the norm. The norm is actually, it's the couple on, I don't want to butcher it. I'm a pastor. I'm supposed to know this. The road to Emmaus after the resurrection. There's couple walking down the road. They're sad. Jesus walks up on them. Right, which is a funny story, and they don't recognize Jesus. We don't know what's going on there, and they have this conversation about why they're sad, and they've heard that Jesus may have resurrected, but they haven't seen him, but they're still bummed out about it. And so Jesus pretends to go on his own way, and they invite him to their house for a meal. And as they break bread, which is an important symbolism that's going on there, their eyes are opened. And what they talk about, there's a really fascinating part in that story where they go, our hearts were burning in that conversation. There was something in them that knew what was going on. Now, I know that that's a short time span, but I think that's actually a microcosm for a lot of things that are happening with a lot of people. Is there's this time where they're walking with Jesus. They're getting to know them. Their hearts begin to burn. Then they're in I would be hesitant to call what they were doing in their house church. But there is a symbolism there that they're in the presence of Christ. Bread is broken, eyes are opened, and then they worship, right? There's an understanding that's going there. So what that points me to is with these celebrities, what I would argue is this, is I'm looking for their participation in a good local church for them.
Amen. Yeah.
Right? Like that's the thing that I'm looking for. Who are they submitting themselves to? Like, it's great that Russell Brand got baptized. I wish he would have gotten baptized in his church to his church.
Yep.
He also didn't know, probably.
Right.
But that also speaks to why maybe he shouldn't be leading your Bible study.
Maybe.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or all these sorts of things. And so what I'm looking for is what we have to do as a church is when lost people come in and they have all these questions and it's exciting and maybe they have a crazy story or they're influential in our city or our context and they're curious about it. The key is no status is above Christ, for one, but they are still called to submit to a local church under the leadership of local elders. And so that's a marker. I think that's a big fruit that a lot of Christians pay no attention to.
I agree. Yeah. And I think to go back to kind of how we talked earlier about hypocrisy and nominalism in cultural Christianity, what cracks me up, these people should not be taken seriously who make these arguments, because the end of the road for them is exactly what has led to the collapse of the West, which is if the vision is, we want everyone to be addicted to black tar heroin because then they'll be really depraved and really able to know that they need Jesus. That's a pretty demented view of humanity and for society. And like you said, it would be better for a child to be raised in the faith in a local church and come to a saving knowledge of their faith and be able to have a clear conscience before the Lord. That would be so much better. And for so much evangelism, it's so much more answering tough questions, walking with people through pain and trials, celebrating life with them. And the idea that we should just want Christian culture to go away, we should want kind of like secularism to be the norm, that's really bad for people. And it's really, it's not consistent with the Christian faith. And like I said, these people should not be taken seriously because the end of the road for them is exactly why a lot of these people are now interested in Christianity, their disillusionment. And so these people like Ray Ortlund who say these kind of things, I hope for the best, but I can't help but wonder if they have some kind of masochistic or sadistic kind of like a fantasy of like, the West being totally apostate and everyone's suffering. And then we can have authentic Christianity. I mean, it's basically like they want to, pour acid on social fabric, and that's very disturbing. They're social revolutionaries, and that's really disturbing.
Yeah, what I think about, and we should wrap up here in a moment, but when I think about what they want and those sorts of things that they think would be better for the church, it's just funny because I lived a lot of the things that they say, and I'm just like, it's not better. I want my kids to have a very boring testimony. That would be awesome. In case the listeners are wondering, that is Juniper scratching. So
I'm so sorry.
No, you're good. It's funny. It's funny. It's very natural. We wanted a more laid back environment, so we brought Boulder. A dog in. But I also think what we need to be prepared for when we think about this kind of stuff, the curiosity that is peaking from a lot of people from a lot of different streams. Like, so when you get somebody like a Russell Brand, a Joe Rogan, like Joe Rogan's notorious for like what conspiracy theories and all that kind of stuff. If he's talking about Christianity, having Wesley Huff on his podcast to talk about the historical relevance of the Bible and different things like that and its truth, that makes people curious. It's also drawing out some very fascinating and interesting people from strange backgrounds, like Russell Brand, who comes from New Age kind of stuff. And so, like, we just had a guy in our church who I invited, who I met at the gym. He's into all sorts of crazy stuff. And he's now texting guys in our church because I've introduced him to people. And we need to be prepared to answer those sorts of things and handle that. And the reality is it can be very fun. But we need to go back to the thing of just going like, don't get so caught up in the reality that, man, I got somebody who's not a Christian to come to church. They're curious about the things of Christianity. I'm just going to let that ride. I think there's some wisdom in there, but at the end of the day, you need to, if they're like, yeah, man, I think Jesus might actually be God. And you're like, that's great. And they're like, and this crystal aligns my chakras. You should say, no, that's pagan worship.
Right.
And you shouldn't do that. Like that's the thing that I see a lot of the church missing with a lot of these celebrities, but those celebrities do lead to people who listen to them showing up every day in our churches.
Yeah, I will say on this, I remember back when Donald Trump visited David Platt's church and David Platt prayed for him. You can go look it up. I think it was a good prayer, but I think he had to like apologize afterwards, which is super lame. But as a church, it's interesting that some of these celebrities end up going to mega churches so they can just kind of blend in. And I don't blame them for that because like in the church, it becomes very weird. I mean, they're people. So like you get a celebrity that comes to church. I remember one time we had the former head of CU football come to visit our church when we were at Casey. Do you remember this?
Yeah.
And it was very tempting to go like, we should treat him differently, I guess. And there wasn't really the unction for you and I. I mean, we wanted to like greet him. But there needs to be an appreciation for the questions they're asking, that they're coming in, people recognize them, that kind of thing. But there also needs to be some humility to think like they're a person that needs salvation. And in the church, we're not going to display favoritism in a way that's ungodly. And so there's a tension there because a lot of these celebrities will kind of get in their own, like Russell Brand, Justin Bieber, get in their own kind of elite status Christian culture where they're like flying to different churches or like starting their own church or whatever it may be.
Wild.
And like you said, it's so important to be connected to a local church. So I do hope I don't know if we would have celebrities come visit us, but if they did, they would be treated like normal people.
We'd get like triathletes or something.
Yeah, right. But there should be some measure of respect in knowing their social kind of status, kind of honoring the natural hierarchy of someone who has a lot of power and influence, while also not debasing ourselves and giving ourselves over to like this person's really special, or something like that.
Yeah. No, I agree. Well, that's fun. Anything else you want to talk about on this? Or?
No, I think we're good for this one. So.
Yeah, it's fun. It's a fun topic. Hopefully you found it interesting. If not, I guess you probably turned it off a while ago. So that's fine. Well, thanks for listening and or watching or whatever platform you used to absorb this podcast. So, hey, keep listening. Subscribe so you make sure you know about it. Share it with some friends. Hopefully this is a huge blessing to you, and we'll keep serving you through this podcast. We'll talk to you next time.